could sing of your love forever. I could sing of your love. Mountains and the sea, your river runs with love for me, and I will open up my heart and let the healer set me free. I'm happy to be in the truth, and I will daily lift my hands, for I will always sing of when your love came down. I could sing of your love forever. 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 Oh, I feel like dancing. It's foolishness, I know. For when the world has seen the light, they will dance with joy like we're dancing now. I could sing of your love forever. 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 My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. We're going to sing that again. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. My anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong. come with trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless stand before the throne. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love through the storm. He is Lord, Lord of all. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love through the storm. He is Lord, Lord of all. You can be seated.
Some of y'all are out hunting. It's great to see you this morning. This morning we're going to talk about bullying, but before I get to that exciting and devotional topic, I need to invite you somewhere. Now, we are in close cooperation with a number of local churches. One of them is Rives Baptist Church. We always say Rives very loud and Baptist very quietly. Because we love them. They have invited us to Thanksgiving dinner next week. And so it's not in the bulletin. It will happen right after church service. So they're making all the turkey. And so we can go have a good turkey dinner on the house and just bring a passing dish. So about 12:15 it's going to kick off. And so we'll have lunch with them, just like we did a couple weeks ago. It'll be a lot of fun. Next week, lunch at Rives, turkey dinner, bring a passing dish. And what do we always bring, Pathway?
Good stuff.
The good stuff, that's right. The good stuff. What else? Am I missing anything else? 12:15. So really what we'll do is we'll finish up service. I'll probably run hastily to Meijer and pick up some cookies or something. And that'll be my contribution. Well, it's made by somebody's grandma, right? Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for your word. I thank you for all that you've given us, Lord. I thank you for what you've promised in your word. I thank you for the comfort that you give us, Lord, knowing that you watch over us so carefully, Father. I pray, Lord, for the folks that can't be here, for the folks who are hunting, I pray good success, Lord. And I pray also safety, Father. And for those folks who are sick this morning, I pray that you bring them back to health, Lord. And Father, as we approach the holiday season, Lord, I just pray that you be glorified. And we thank you, Father, in Christ's name. A couple of notes for the calendar, I guess. This is our fourth hot topic, and we'll do one more. So next week we'll do a psalm, and then I'll be off for Thanksgiving week. My good friend Chris Garland is going to come, and he's going to preach for us. And then our last hot topic will be poverty. That puts us into December. What do we do in December? Christmas stuff. So if you put your decorations up already, you're the people who cause them the SNOW, so decorations come after Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, well.
At my house they do. That's a thing. It's my rule, it is. I get about 3 rules in my house. And that's what and then we'll do Christmas stuff. We'll spend some time, reflecting on the birth of Christ and how that affects us in the holiday season. And then in the new year, I haven't really sat down and decided on a couple things. I've got some ideas, so if you have suggestions, I'm always open to suggestions, not revelation. So we'll have some good stuff in the news. You know, as I think about the way that a good story works, have you ever thought about a good, I mean, you know when you're reading a good story, especially because you know when you pick up a bad story. You ever pick up a bad story and you're like a couple pages in, you're like, I think this might be a bad story. And then you finish maybe a chapter and you're like, this is not holding my attention. It's not engaging. The characters are just kind of ponderous. I'm going to skip it and move on. Especially if it's an author that you like, you know, somebody that's been around for a while who sort of knows better. Don't you hate that? I hate that. But a good story catches your imagination. And a great story is the kind of work that catches your imagination and makes you think about big and important ideas. Stories sometimes create imaginary worlds, but other times they reimagine, they re-image the world that we live in to make a point. You know, the last 2 weeks we saw how the prophets revealed the future storyline of people who refuse to do the right thing. And they envision, hey, judgment is coming. And then they create this picture of coming judgment in order to bring people to repentance. That's what the prophets do. They look at how history is going or how people are behaving, and they say, if you don't get straight, God's going to come in here and God's going to judge. And then apocalyptic is the kind of literature that says, even in judgment, God is compassionate towards his people. You know, God sees the suffering of his people, and he wants to ease that suffering as best he can. So I thought about today's topic, bullying. I thought about our nature. You know, the people that we are deep down, that we don't even often talk about. We're created in God's image, but Adam and Eve's rebellion against God in the garden left us broken. We don't naturally and effortlessly follow God. I wish that we did. Don't you? Wouldn't it be great if, like, as a society, we just naturally, like, we wouldn't need stacks of law books. We would say, oh yeah, the 10 Commandments, let's just do that, right? It would be easy if we naturally followed after God, but we don't. It takes the redemption of Jesus to restore us to that relationship to God. And then it takes disciplined effort over time to become more like him, to live out that new relationship. The natural tendency of man is not to evolve into a morally better being, it's to devolve into savagery and chaos. William Golding is an author who he survived World War II, and then he wrote a book in 1954 called The Lord of the Flies. It's the last time I read it was high school, I'll be honest. You know, it's one of those books that you are required to read, and it talks about the devolution of mankind into savagery. The Lord of the Flies is about an airplane full of English schoolboys who crash on a deserted island, and they have to sort of fend for themselves. All of the adults have died in the crash, and so now these boys have to put together a new society as they wait for rescue. And so they decide on 3 rules. One rule is to have fun. I mean, maybe that's a good rule, but it certainly is limited, right? To survive. Okay, that's a good rule. And then the third rule is to keep a signal fire burning. So those are the 3 big rules. Now, you as adults could poke some holes in those rules, right? What does it say about treating other people well? Nothing. What does it say about who's leading or who's in charge? Nothing. And so very quickly what happens is the boys descend into chaos. And in that chaos, I mean, they do bad things. Their system breaks down into anarchy, and what Golding intends is to show the nature of humankind. That we are by nature chaotic. We are by nature violent. We are by nature anarchists. Golding was a World War II Navy officer who participated in several actions. He actually commanded a landing ship on D-Day. And so he saw up close and personal the savagery that one man can commit against another. The idea that people are filled with violence resonates throughout Scripture and history. You don't have to search very long to find out. that there's violence in the world. How do we stop it? Can we stop it? How are violence and bullying affecting our children and grandchildren? Bullying and violence are closely related. Bullying, a definition is this: the mistreatment of someone vulnerable by someone stronger or more powerful. It creates anxiety in the bullied person who waits daily for insults and mocking. While it is often short of actual violence, bullying often precedes it, creating social distance between the powerful and the popular and other people. Bullying affects the story one tells themselves. They begin to replace truth with taunts and the jabs of their bullies without rewriting the narrative, without retelling ourselves what God says in His Word. We run the risk of believing those things. Throughout this series, I've repeated several foundational ideas. And what I want to do, I'm going to use a visual aid today. I hope that's all right. I had to convince my wife to let me borrow her bocce balls. They have holes in them now, but this is the idea. These are the ideas that we've been talking about. Imagine this is you. Okay, so you're one of these balls here, and you're inside this framework, and you're connected. You're connected. I mean, these things aren't going to go anywhere, I hope, right? That would be great. They're locked in there. They're secure because they're oriented to the frame. You think about idea number one, that we're created in the image of God. That orients you to something outside yourself, that holds you in place, that keeps you from moving too far. You think about your responsibilities with number two, to love God and love other people. And that orients you to the world around you. It tells you, what are my responsibilities towards other human beings? I always use her as an example. What are my responsibilities to her? I have to love her. Now, she's lovable, but she's got her moments, right? Especially when I say, I need your bocce balls. Yeah, decaffeinated grandma is terrifying. So idea number one, that we're created in God's image, orients us to the world around us. Idea number two, that we're to love God and love other people, tells us our responsibilities. And for the Christian in the church, those three ideas that we have, the last three, confessing Jesus as Lord, which includes the idea that I'm going to look to the Bible, that I'm going to evaluate Scripture carefully to see what God says. That's part of confessing Jesus as Lord. That God is the moral owner of the universe. That God says what's right and what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong. We form publicly identifiable communities across racial and generational boundaries. There's no room for racism or ageism in Christianity. When we engage in mission to our community, helping other people get oriented correctly to God and the world around them. The first thing I want to talk about is the sin that is inside of us. It's inside all of us. And only with the redemption of God can we overcome it and be right before Him. Where there is no fear of God, sin abounds. Take a look with me, if you would, please, in the book of Romans chapter 3. Verses 9 through 20. Romans was written by the Apostle Paul as he's writing a letter to Rome. He hasn't been there yet. Remember, in the book of Acts, he was on his way there. He sent a letter kind of before he got there. And it's a very theological letter. It's designed, it's very systematic. It goes through the ideas involved in our salvation, the ideas of our relationship to God, the ideas of how we grow closer to Him. The framework of the book, Warren Wiersbe has 5 big sections. The first section of the book is about sin, about what sin is and about who's guilty of sin. The second part of the book talks about salvation. What does it take to be in a right relationship to God? Sin, salvation, sanctification. What does it mean to grow in that relationship with God? What are my responsibilities? What do I have to do? The third section, Warren Wiersbe calls it sovereignty, but really it's about the question, what about Israel? Aren't they the chosen people of God? How are they the chosen people of God? And now I can become in a right relationship with God. And then finally, the final section of the book is about service. And so in this first section of the book, in this first section of the book of Romans, Paul examines all of humanity. And he determines that everyone is lost. Paul starts with the pagans, he ends with the Jewish people, he starts with the least religious and ends with the most religious before concluding that everyone is under sin. We are created in God's image, but sin damages our very being. It doesn't matter how good or how religious you are. Everyone has to come to God His way, through Jesus Christ, and through trusting in what Jesus Christ has done on the cross on our behalf. And that starts with knowing that you're broken by sin. Take a look at verse 9. What shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? No, not at all, for we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin, as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways. And the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. Therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our own sin. Now what Paul is trying to say here is that you can't earn your way to get right with God. You can't do enough good. You know, if I was working in the good works factory, and every day we produce 10 good works, whew, that's good, right? And we're just cranking them out day after day after day. That doesn't make up for the sin that is in my heart and in my soul. It doesn't make me unbroken. It doesn't make me perfect. And God requires that we be perfect before Him. And so what Paul is doing in this first section of Romans, he's not talking about salvation yet. He's not talking about how you've gotten right with God and you still struggle with sin. He's talking about before you accept Jesus, you're lost in sin. Systematic theologian Michael Horton says, still God's image bearers, we have everything with which God created for us to fulfill our purpose. However, since the fall, we're in bondage to unbelief and unrighteousness. And so the book of Romans will go on from this chapter 3, and the next little part of chapter 3, what he's going to tell us is that we need Jesus. And that Jesus brings us into a right relationship, a restored relationship with God. And then he encourages us to grow into that relationship. And then finally, the book of Romans is going to teach us about serving one another. So it's a very logical progression. From lost to saved. Right? That's how we identify Christians. They are saved from the wrath of God. From lost to saved. From saved to growing in that relationship. And from growing in that relationship to serving God and serving one another. What about people who don't believe in God? What about people who don't follow Jesus? They're still stuck in bondage to unbelief and unrighteousness. Created in God's image and worthy of our respect, there's no question about that, and yet broken by sin. We were that before we came to Jesus. The world is that. Paul says that they're not righteous, that they're ignorant of God, that they're not good, that they're not honest, they're not kind, they're violent, their feet are swift to shed blood. Theologians discuss how what systems restrain our behavior. We're not as bad as we could be. We fear punishment by the government, so we keep our speed reasonable. We limit our violent tendencies. We might have a background worldview that inhibits our sinfulness for any number of reasons. Our family values usually teach us to restrain our violent impulses. Romans 1:18 talks about the creation itself has an order and a rightness to it that leads us to ethics. But without coming to God through Jesus, our natural tendency is towards wrongdoing, not away from it. Even our attempts at being good. Even as I'm working in the good factory, I'm proud of myself. You know, and I fall into the sin of pride. Humanity doesn't evolve into something better. We devolve, going from bad to worse. And the result is often violence. When I looked up the word massacre. And the first use of the word massacre is from the mid-1500s. This is before the widespread use of firearms. This is before the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. This goes back far enough that it's Catholics against Protestants. People we live in peace with, even now. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was a group of targeted assassinations across France which killed between 5,000 and 30,000 people. One group of religious people made a different group the other. Outsiders. People to be feared, hated, and destroyed. At the time, there was no mechanism, there was no way of thinking that people of different religious backgrounds could live in peace. And so what really happens, these are billed as religious wars, but they're really political wars fought under the umbrella of religion. Because there was no mechanism to live in peace. Church attendance was mandatory. You were required to attend the church of your king's choice. Our natural tendencies to sin come out. We do what's wrong. And the process of growth towards God brings us closer to Him and farther from those natural tendencies, closer to the biblical ideal as we bring these key ideas into our mind and habits. I want to use a slide here to just talk about a couple of ideas. The first slide is going to say God. On the left-hand side, it's going to say God. And when you think about God, what do you think about? Who is God? He is our creator, right? And if He's the creator of humanity, if He is my creator, He made me. I have some words about that. I'd like to be a little bit taller. Right? But He made me this way for a reason. And so He made me. If He's my maker, then He's also my owner. I am accountable to Him. He is the judge. He gets to set the standard of right and wrong. So when we move from God as creator and owner and judge to the second thing, morality is set by God. What it looks like to be good, it looks like what God says. He holds me accountable. I can't make it up as I go. Hey, God, I've been pretty good today. That's not really the standard. God sets the standard. And so God is the creator, the moral owner. He sets the standard of accountability. And then obedience, disobedience, clear standards are recognizable. If I do something inappropriate at home and my wife says, hey, you violated Scripture. Ruh-roh. I know I'm in trouble. Not just in trouble with her, I'm in trouble with the God who made me. And so this idea, think about this idea permeating society. If God is the creator and moral owner of everyone, then what does morality look like? It looks like what God says. It looks like what God requires of everyone in society. Now I want to think about the next slide. Because what happens when God's moral ownership gets fuzzy? And you think about how that works in society. If we walk around thinking, you can't quite see it, and that's exactly what I wanted, but it's still there. What happens when society stops to believe that they're created by God? What happens when we stop believing that God is our moral authority, that God is our owner, that I am obligated to be obedient to Him? Well, then society erupts in chaos. Society doesn't work well. Society doesn't work well. Our natural tendencies. The natural tendencies of people who don't follow Jesus comes out. And that affects us. Bullying is the mistreatment of someone vulnerable by someone stronger or more powerful. It's often subtle. The social and emotional destruction of another person happens right in front of other people. Because where there is no fear of God, where that idea fades, bullying increases. Sin abounds where there's no fear of God. And where there is no fear of God, chaos reigns. Let's take a look at Psalm 36, the first 4 verses real quick. Psalm 36 says this, I have a message from God in my heart concerning the sinfulness of the wicked. There is no fear of God before their eyes. In their own eyes they flatter themselves, too much to detect or hate their sin. The words of their mouth are wicked and deceitful. They fail to act wisely or do good. Even on their beds they plot evil and commit themselves to a sinful course and do not reject what is wrong. Well, the psalm just describes people who will not follow after God, people who reject. And really, when I thought about the plotting, it's like they're laying in bed waiting to get up, thinking about the evil they're going to commit today. I wonder if that's the description of a bully. A bully is self-inflated and arrogant. What happens to society when the threads that connect us to that framework of ideas, what happens when those threads get broken? I stole the secretary's scissors, so. I haven't practiced this. What happens when these ideas get weakened? What happens when there's no connection to the world around you? You're lost. Do you even realize it? See, it works perfectly. That's about you. There's often a vague memory of the image of God, but what happens when it gets fuzzy and then destroyed? What happens to a person who's not moored by those ideas? What happens to a society when they're disconnected? Bullying and violence thrive in the absence of clear moral standards and accountability. Social development. Well, and this is true, like when we think about how society has changed over the last 50 years or so, or even 100 years. We've become more prosperous. We have more spare time than we've had in the past. And in that spare time, we fill it with less and less meaningful things. Right? It's the idea that you're looking at your phone, but what is your phone doing to you? Have you ever thought about that? When you're looking at cat videos, you know what I found? I found that when I'm having dinner with my wife, I'm thinking, this is not entertaining. I should be looking at my phone. Now, it's not her obligation to entertain me. Maybe it's my obligation to entertain her, right? Put the phone down. Pay attention to your wife. Because that's not just good for you as a person, that's good for everyone as a society. Because don't we do that when we go out to dinner with friends? I'm out to dinner with friends wondering who texted me. When there's a friend sitting right there. What is our phone doing to us? This rising prosperity gives us more free time, and in that free time we fill it with less and less meaningful things. Communication has become indirect and impersonal. We prefer emails and text messages to actual give and take conversations. We use social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to give updates about what we think, believe, and do. We even let the whole world know what we're having for lunch. Social media presents a false picture and generates a false comparison. What happens when we use social media, and folks, I'm on Facebook. I have pictures of my grandchildren, pictures of my dog, funny stories that I hear, occasionally insightful things this way or that way. What's your philosophy of Facebook? Right? Have you ever thought about it? What are you trying to accomplish? But in this Facebook life, people wake up and they see, oh man, Pastor Todd's got a dog. That must be so great. You know what? A lot of times it is until at 4 o'clock in the morning she's throwing up. And there are two sounds in life that will get you out of bed quicker than anything, a baby or a dog throwing up. I don't put that on Facebook. I put the happy picture when she's like, oh look, she's a good girl. There she is. She was having a conversation with my granddaughter the other day. And I interrupted them. And so they both looked at me like I was crazy. I snapped a picture, it goes on Facebook. You know what? Sometimes the baby's a jerk too. And inconvenient? I love her. But man, I wish she could just go outside and use the bathroom. Facebook is this false picture. It's this false happiness. And when we begin comparing, man, my life is not like all everybody else's on Facebook. They've got a great life. Well, that's silliness. Right? We as adults know that that's silly. What about our kids and grandkids? You know, everybody posts pictures of their lunch, but nobody posts pictures of their sink full of dishes, right? I know, I'd better not. And so what happens is we've lost, as a society, we've backed away from like real communication. We backed away from real relationships and created this false bubble where we're disconnected from real ideas. Society is losing the important theological concepts, the important Christian worldview that orients them to the world around them. That people, not their Facebook profiles, the people behind the profile, that's where the value is. That's the person that needs to be spoken to and spoken into. One of the greatest questions you can ask somebody is, hey, how are you doing? And then when they say, oh, yeah, I'm good. No, really. I want to know. That's different in all this society. A lot of people don't want to know. Society is losing the concept that all humanity is created in God's image and worthy of dignity and respect. We're forgetting that God is the ultimate accountability for all of our actions, good and bad. And this contributes to the problem of bullying. We have forgotten that people are people. Without accountability and a foundation of good ideas, right and wrong get lost, leaving only power and weakness. Angelina Green was a 14-year-old 8th grader who believed the lies her bullies told her. Over and over, she was teased and tormented on the bus and in school. In the note she left for her mother, she said to her bullies, "Have you ever thought about what you said to me? Maybe not, because you killed me every day." She went on to say, "You told me so much that I started believing it. I was stupid for doing that. Every morning, day and night, I look in the mirror and cry and replay the harmful words in my head." She eventually took her life where her bullies would see her body. She closed her suicide note with, "It's bullying that killed me. Please get justice." This incident was used to get anti-bullying legislation passed in Indiana. The reality is that the problem is much deeper. The problem is in a broken society. The problem is that Angelina was cut adrift from true ideas about herself. There was nobody speaking into her life saying, "You're created in God's image. Not only are you obligated to love God and love other people, they're obligated to love you. And nobody was speaking that into her life. Where there is no fear of God, the God who knows and judges, sin abounds and chaos reigns. And so fearing God, we need to be renewed in the whole self. Take a look at the book of Ephesians. We spent a good amount of time in Ephesians a while back. Chapter 4, verse 17. "So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. That, however, is not the way of life you learned. When you heard about Christ and were taught in Him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." Your natural tendency has to be put off so that you can habitually, over and over, put on what God says about you. Putting on the new self is by habitual attention to what God desires. What does God say about you? You're created in His image. And you have to say that over and over sometimes. And you have to tell your kids that. And you have to tell your grandkids that. You're created in God's image. You're broken by sin. But that doesn't ever, ever, ever remove the image of God in you. We have to strengthen the cords that orient us to the world around us, that we're made in the image of God. We're made to love God and serve others. And we proclaim Christ, we form a community, and we engage in mission. Dallas Willard says this in the spirit of the disciplines: our bodies are shaped into a specific character and laden with specific skills and tendencies by our experience, including those we voluntarily undertake. There is some latitude within which our character is formed by ourselves. Through His life-giving word, God in regeneration renews our original capacity for divine interaction. But our body's substance is only to be transformed totally by actions and events in which we choose to participate from day to day. You see, bullying is the habitual, subtle violence. It's the re-narrating of somebody's story. It's telling them that they're not created in God's image, that they're not worthwhile, that they're not. It's a lie. It's a lie. It destroys a person's self-image, and it by narrating the world of the bully and the victim, it rests on a foundation of things that are not true about human beings, and particularly untrue about Christians. And so when I think about this illustration, what has to happen is that we have to come alongside people. And we have to say, no, what you're believing is wrong. Somebody has told you at school or at work or wherever that you're not valuable, but that's not true. And I know it's not true because of what God says about you. It doesn't matter what I say about you. It matters what God says. And so we have to, I don't know if I can even pull this off. I didn't practice this either. And so we reconnect all these threads. We rebuild these in the lives of the people around us so that we can say, hey, I know what your bully said to you, but you know what God says about you? Over and over and over again, that you are valuable to Him. And so it suddenly doesn't matter quite as much what a bully says about you, because they're just people. Once you rebuild those ideas in the life of another person, they can endure. How do you do it? How do you rebuild those concepts? You just tell them. You invite them to tell them, how was your day at school? Usually what I get is, it was fine. Okay. But there's sometimes, usually with Grandma, where he weakens a little bit. And he has a little moment. And then you enter into that moment. And you say, no. What does God say about you? Over and over and over again. What does God say? And you've got to build that into your life. You've got to wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I'm a little surprised to see you here. And God says, I'm made in His image. And then the kids look in the mirror. Rather than narrating a story or believing what their bullies tell them, they have to believe what God said. And what it takes is repetition, over and over and over again. It takes repeating it, restating it. As you identify the new relationship that you have to God, you replace what other people say about you with what God says about you. Creating this new story, there's value in art therapy, there's value in writing therapy, there's value in all kinds of things like that. To say, who am I in God's eyes? I'm no artist. But there's value in restating over and over these very simple ideas. When you engage these ideas in your life and in the lives of your children and grandchildren, don't let the false story that they're told by their peers be the only story that they know. Volunteer at schools. Like, just thinking very practically, Volunteer at a school. They'll love to have you. They're overwhelmed by these little terrors who live in a world filled with chaos, and you could sit down one-on-one with a kid and just tell them the truth. You know, you're made in God's image. Oh, you might get fired, but you're a volunteer anyway. What are they going to do? When you think about your kids and your grandkids, when you take them out hunting, when you take them out just to do whatever, repeat and reinforce these ideas. They need it. Because bullying changes the way one views themselves and the world around them. It fills the mind of the victim with a false story that they are worthless and their life is pointless. Your life has a point because you woke up this morning. And so God has something for you to do today. In the book, The Lord of the Flies, the Castaway Boys believed the story that they created for themselves. They believed that they were there on the island to have fun, to survive, and to keep the smoke signal going. And very quickly it descended into absolute chaos. When reality showed up in the form of a Navy destroyer, their world crashed because it was based on falsehood. And that's how we crash the false world that's being created in the lives of people who are being bullied. After you brush your teeth, look in the mirror and say, I'm created in God's image. And God left me here for a reason. And so I'm going to go do it as best I can today. Many of our kids wake up in the modern world. They check their Facebook or their Instagram or their Snapchat, and they start seeing how many clicks did I get last night. And that's how they build their self-image. Oh, look, somebody liked my picture. Well, that doesn't matter for building your self-image. What matters is the truth, that you're created. They go to school, they get bullied, they believe the false story. What if you started your day by reminding yourself of 1, 2, 3, and then as you help your kids and grandkids start their day? Hey, let's brush your teeth. Hey, did you know while you're brushing your teeth? You can't talk back. Hey, did you know while you're brushing... Well, I'll try. You're brushing your teeth. Hey, did you know that you're created in God's image? God left you here for a special reason. Let's go find out what that is today. You know what that does to a kid? They'll believe you. And what that does to a kid in society is it anchors them to something that's true and real, unshaken. It'll whip you. The stronger you make those cords, the stronger you make your kids, the stronger you make society. As the praise team comes up, I am selling this.
Mine's flexible.
Let's pray together. Father, I thank you so much for all that you've given us. Lord, bullying is wrong. And we're going to trust that you will handle the bullies. And so, Father, as you handle the bullies, or knowing that that's true, having confidence in that, Lord, help us to do practical things that help our families. Help us to do the things that create in our kids and grandkids the idea, the knowledge, the certain and sure trust that they are made in your image and left here for a reason. Let us give them a purpose that is beyond themselves, that is beyond the internet, that is beyond Facebook. Father, let's introduce them to reality. Lord, watch over our kids and grandkids. Watch over the future of this world, Lord. Watch over people who are lost in sin, whose idea of self-esteem comes from the internet. Help us to pray for them. Help us to love them because they bear your image. Thank you, Lord, for all that you've given in your Son, Jesus Christ. And we praise you in Christ's name.
Built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, though Now, I don't know if I'm the only person who falls into this, but sometimes I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to bullying. Sometimes I'm like, people don't love you, you're dumb, why would you screw up like that? The fact of the matter is that the Lord loves a chubby guy with one eye that's smaller than the other. I know that the Lord loves me. And so I just pray that when we're hard on ourselves, that we can give us the benefit of the doubt because the Lord loves us, each and every one of us. And I just pray that we can also speak that love into the people around us. Be kind for kindness' sake. Be loved for love's sake. Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became cold. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it costs to see my sin upon that cross. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Father God, thank you. Thank you for your love, Lord, for creating us in your image, Lord, for the truth that we are loved, Lord. Thank you, Lord, that our value does not come from what we think of ourselves or what society has to say about who we are. God, the only thing that matters is what you say about who we are. God, our value is steeped in your opinion of us. And you love us so much that you're willing to send your son to die. God, I'll never understand fully what that means. I'll never understand that cost.
Thank you for a value system that is so much more than what our opinions are. God, I just pray that you'd have us go out into this world and speak truth and life and love into the people around us, Lord. It's in your Son Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You're dismissed.